Hello, everybody. If I could ask you all to be quiet. And I want to welcome you to our panel today. So, as you know, you are at the panel that you have chosen for building safe and healthy mental health relationships. So, I'm just going to go over what you read in the blurb, that this panel will break down all that goes into a positive and a healthy relationship with a mental health provider. The importance of strong boundaries, the balance between trust and relying, independence and taking responsibility for self, guidelines for personal disclosure, knowing what is relevant, and the kinds of effort required by a client to get the most out of their therapy will hopefully be touched on in this panel. So we are very lucky to have 4 wonderful panelists today. And I'm going to introduce each panelist before they speak, but I'm just going to, we run through them quickly. So to my right, we have Meshulem Gotlieb, and we have Professor Strous, and Mendel Horowitz, and Ricki Jacobson Davies. Or is it the other way? Jacobson Davies. Thank you. So I'm going to start over here, and we're going to first hear from each panelist for 5 minutes, and then we're going to switch to the next panelist. But before we start, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Leena. I coordinate the place, the Jerusalem Center for Emotional Well-Being, located in Ramat Eshkol. The place is a psychotherapy clinic. We also provide education for the community, workshops, support groups. We also have a professional team. We do professional development, and we have an internship program. And we also provide therapy on a sliding scale, so by qualified therapists. The place has been established since 2009, and it provides top quality therapy and emotional support to improve and enhance people's lives. So anything else you'd like to know about the place, we have a booth upstairs. I'd be happy to talk to any and all of you by the time the day is done. Okay, so we are going to start now with Professor Strous, and I'm going to just read a little bit about him. Okay, so Professor Strous is the director of the psychiatry department at Ma'aneh HaYeshua Medical Center. And he's a full professor of psychiatry at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine at Tel Aviv University. He's the chief editor of the Israel Journal of Psychiatry and chairman of the Israel Psychiatry Association Ethics Committee. His research interests are the fields of psychopharmacology, genetics, neuroimaging, neurosteroids, epidemiology, and ethics. And he runs marathons and ultramarathons to keep sane. So without further ado, I turn it over to Professor Strous.
So I'm from South Africa, but I trained in psychiatry at Albert Einstein in the Bronx. And I don't remember many experiences from when I was there, but I remember a question that was asked of the residents on the first day. And they said to us, what is the most important thing to know as a psychiatrist? What's the most important quality of being a good mental health professional? And what would people say? If I asked you now, what is the most important thing to be a good mental health professional? Empathy, everyone says, it's important, but not the most important thing. What else? Caring, relationships, boundaries. And that's the first thing I say to medical students and residents on the first day of their training. The most important thing to be a good mental health professional is understanding and respect of boundaries. And in Israel, we are excellent at giving quality care in all fields of social work, psychology, psychiatry, Havava Yitzira, the art therapists, the music, they're excellent, but we're not good at boundaries. And why? Because we're one big family. And one big family is very good because we care, but we need to work on this empathic detachment, what they call. That boundaries are critical. And that's why some of the best therapists are rabbis and teachers, and that's some of the rabbis, the best therapists in these areas. The higher you are, the greater you fall because of not a respect for boundaries. And boundaries provide for a safe relationship. Boundaries are value that is timeless and universal, which responds and reflects all kinds of relationships, but are critical in mental health professional relationships. And we're not so good at that. We should not be treating people in our neighborhood. We should not be treating our friends. We should not be seeing people in our homes. We should have that distance. And rabbis when they're giving sometimes therapy, and they sometimes are excellent therapists, rabbis should understand that there's a power differential here, and that sometimes can be exploited. And when students have teachers that are giving in therapy as well, they should also be careful. A rabbi and a teacher and a psychologist and a psychiatrist should never be seeing people in a coffee house. When we seeing people in the wards, and sometimes we do that, we do not meet with our patients in the coffee room, in the Beit Cafe, or on the street, whatever. It has to be in that kind of environment which is safe, because boundaries protect the relationship, and being cold by not answering personal questions is not being cold. It's maintaining that empathic detachment, and it only contributes to that relationship. And we need to make sure of that. But that even goes a step further, because when I am seeing a therapist, when we are seeing patients, we need to make sure that that boundary there is also respecting other aspects of the relationships, and that's the ethics that come in relationships, and that's also the law. And we should also respect when people are coming from backgrounds that are not so simple, and that we should be sensitive sometimes to the financial issues. And in Israel, when we see patients, we should be respecting the law, and we should be giving kabbalot, receipts. Yes, there should not be. And most of the therapists, especially sometimes in the non-Kupat Cholim, all in the private world, people are not respecting the law and are not giving, and not paying always tax on this. Now, when it comes to medical, people are getting refunds many of the time, so that for sure they're the receipts. But when there's not, there's a great temptation not to, and that's a problem. And I think that's another form of boundaries that's to respect. In a professional relationship, there is a financial side to it, but it should be respected. We are respecting law as well. What kind of therapist is it that is not respecting law, breaking the law, and on the other hand is supposed to giving me good professional treatment? We should make sure and demand professionalism. Now, professionalism involves many different aspects. We mentioned one or two boundaries, but there's also an issue of being on time. The problem is in this country that professionals are overwhelmed, especially in the field of psychiatry, and psychiatrists in the clinics are not always timely, and that's a problem. But that should be, that should at least some kind of accountability should be demanded and should be requested. I think that people, the most important thing in maintaining a safe relationship is also trusting yourself. And I'm going to end on this because I think there really are more important people to speak about these issues than me right now. One has to trust oneself. Just like professionals, we trust our feelings and our interaction when we're in the interaction with the patient. And a lot of that is being a good therapist, just being trained to trust yourself. And we know that the projective identification, how critical that is in our maintenance of understanding where the person is at, especially when we're dealing with personality disorders. But I think that the patient themselves, or when you're in a relationship and you're not feeling comfortable, you should talk about that, and that should be addressed. And when someone's not feeling comfortable, one should talk about it, and that should one should demand comfort in that kind of interaction. Okay, I'll end with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to move over to Meshulem Gotlieb, but there's a request by the panelists if anyone could bring them water, a bottle of, because, thank you very much. All right, so Meshulem came to Israel over 35 years ago in 1988. Following a personal encounter with the Israeli mental health system, he co-founded NEAP BPD Israel in 2016, and since then has organized and facilitated over 600 hours of the organization's Family Connections courses. I have personally been involved in this as a volunteer teacher and delivered many public lectures and workshops to both clinicians and the general public. Based on this experience, he presented at the Israel Association for CBT 2021 and 2022 national conferences and presented a talk entitled Localizing the Family Connections Program to the Jewish and Israeli Milieu in the State of Israel at the 2021 International Society for the Study of Personality Disorders Conference in Oslo. He has also begun working closely with Jerusalem's Machon Davies as a freelance client clinician liaison, which is a CCL, and independently as a Bar Ilan University trained coach, specializing in working with family members of people with mental health challenges. His passion is the role of family members in mental health treatment. Meshulem Gotlieb.
Thank you, Leena. I could just start off by saying that I completely agree with Rael. I mean, the importance of boundaries, and really the way he taught us about the importance of boundaries by being bounded himself as he spoke was just really wonderful, and I wholeheartedly agree with. Now that I've said that, as a non-clinician, I would like to take a slightly different tack than my colleagues on the dais. While most, if not all, of my colleagues will focus on the boundaries between patient or client and therapist, I would like to address the role of the family member, the spouse, parent, or sibling in the treatment process. I have just one question to bandy about in the next 4.5 minutes. Given that family members are often excluded, either by confidentiality laws or by therapeutic notions of a safe space and the therapeutic alliance, what are the pluses and minuses of such an approach to therapy? Does excluding family members contribute to making the therapeutic relationship more or less safe and effective for the average patient? To begin with the obvious, if the family member is clearly abusive, then there is no question that he or she needs to be treated extremely diplomatically and distant from the patient as need be. However, in other cases where the relationship between patient and family member can range from very complex to fairly normative, we can reasonably ask what the pluses and minuses are of exclusion, and even more importantly, ask how we can address the minuses. Since exclusion is the default position in many cases, the pluses are fairly obvious. Aside from obeying the law, which Rael pointed out, if the patient is of the age of majority, sex exclusion presumably creates a strong therapeutic alliance that is uninhibited by the family member's input and also ensures that the treatment process is not unduly influenced by negative input from the family. However, this approach leaves the family entirely out of the treatment process, and I think we need to consider how that might backfire. If therapy is not proceeding as the family might wish, this can lead to mistrust between the family members and the clinician, telephone tag, and quite frankly, an adversarial relationship that could have been avoided. Some family members may even have a sneaking suspicion that the treatment team is more concerned with prolonging the process for monetary gain, especially if receipts aren't being issued, as Rael pointed out, than wrapping up the process as soon as possible. Since even in the most successful treatment processes, friction may occur between the therapist and the family members, it is worth considering why this might be so. I would argue that the crux of the problem is a lack of communication, or even worse, miscommunications between the treatment team and family members or vice versa. This can turn the treatment process into a frustrating one, both for the treatment team and the family members, and often impacts upon quality of care. So why do such miscommunications occur? Ironically, in many cases, this lack of communication may not be intentional. Oftentimes, both the therapist and the family member are happy to put off joint meetings, each for their own reasons. Therapists may be uncomfortable meeting family members, since issues of boundaries and confidentiality inherently come up, and family members may be more than happy to dump the whole mess in the clinician's lap. So the meetings often go unscheduled, and at best are replaced by telephone calls or emails that are no substitute for a serious ongoing conversation between clinician and family member, where appropriate. Further muddying the waters, family members who are footing the bill for a minor or even a young adult or a spouse who incidentally has the right to pull the plug, but not the right to know what's going on in therapy, may feel that they have both a need and a right to understand the treatment and be truly heard. Whether or not this is objectively true, and that's a matter of debate, If these needs are not adequately met and validated, this may lead to their interfering with treatment by bad-mouthing the therapeutic modality or the clinicians to the patient, and by their eventually deciding not to continue paying, even if the treatment has shown promise. In fact, they may abruptly end a treatment that is actually working because how the treatment works has not been explained to them in a way that they can understand. To sum up, sometimes family members are kept out of the loop intentionally due to privacy concerns or the clinician's sense that the family members inherently upset the patient and are better kept out of things. However, sometimes they are kept out of the loop unintentionally, a casualty of busy clinician and family member schedules and the sense that keeping the family members in the loop is not all that important. After all, they are not the patient, and therapy is based on clinician-patient inherently. I mean, aside from family dynamics and stuff like that. This may lead to friction even if the process is going well, though when all goes well, much can be forgiven. Finally, whether intentional or not, this situation prevents family members from playing a positive role in the treatment process, a positive role that in truth only they can play. Family members can provide clinicians with pertinent information about their patient's current lifestyle or life choices, which the patient has chosen not to bring up in therapy. This can range from a recurrence of comorbid disorders, such as OCD or eating disorders, to having lost a job, to dubious plans the patient has elected not to share with the therapist. Furthermore, parents who understand the process their family member is going through, or spouses, can even be more effective in supporting and loving their child, and thus playing their salutary role better. By excluding the family members, therapists lose these crucial sources of information and support. So how can clinicians ameliorate the situation? When Leena asks me my question, I will answer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meshulem. We're waiting to hear the answer to the question. Okay, I am now happy to introduce Mendel Horowitz. Mendel Horowitz is an individual and group psychotherapist who works primarily with married men and yeshiva students. Mendel is certified by the International Board of Group Psychotherapists and has published about his work with Orthodox men in the International Journal of Group Psychotherapy. Mendel is also a founding member of the Psychotrauma Unit of United Hatzalah and has been a Rebbe at a gap year yeshiva for 25 years. Thank you very much, Mendel.
I've spoken at international conferences before, but I was saving this anecdote for when I would speak in Yerushalayim. And I want to start with that and then provide you with three very short and very brief details about boundaries that I think you can remember. And they are the following. First and foremost, in whatever relationship, whatever mental health relationship you have with anybody, and of course all relationships can be safe and healthy mental health relationships. Number one is, what is your role? Number two, what are the tasks that flow from that role? And number three, what are the boundaries that flow from those tasks and that identity? And of course, sometimes people have different identities. I myself have three identities that I'm going to stand here today and share with you. First and foremost, I've been a Rebbe for 25 years. I start with that because that predated my work as a therapist. Then I'm a therapist for 15 years and a founding member of the Psychotrauma Unit, which is the most recent of my identities. Now, each one of those identities has different tasks and different boundaries. And here's the anecdote. After I trained to become a psychotherapist, I went to work for a local clinic. And I was walking into the clinic to meet with my first client ever. And my first client ever was, I would say, a middle-aged man who walked into the session holding, it was the middle of the winter, he was holding his coat over his arm, and he was rushing in a little bit late, and he had a cell phone in his hand. And as he walked into the room, he gave me the phone, and he said, "Here, my wife wants to tell you what's wrong with me." It's a true story. I looked around the room to make sure he wasn't here. So as a new therapist, I was stuck. I needed to make a decision, and I needed to defend the decision in my head as to what I would do. And I will share with you what I did. But before I share with you what I did, I think that demonstrates, first and foremost, what is my role. And I need to know what my role is. And every single thing that I do as a practitioner needs to flow from that role. And the roles of a Rebbe and the roles of a therapist and the roles of a psychotrauma responder are very different, and they have very different tasks and very different boundaries. I'll tell you later what I did. As a teacher, as a Rebbe, my goal is to educate, my goal is to inspire, and my boundaries are very porous. The lifetime connection that I have with my students is exactly that. It's lifetime. I tell my students they can knock on my door whenever they want. I tell my students they can call me whenever they want. I tell my students they can ask me whatever they want. And that's very precise to my role as an educator. My role as a therapist is entirely different. And with that, I can share with you another joke that I read recently. Somebody came to a bookstore, and he said to the salesman in the bookstore, "Can you please show me where the self-help section is?" Get it? So the salesperson said, "I can't really do that, because if I do that, I'm defeating the purpose." So I think every therapist has his or her own modality and his or her own way of working. But it needs to first be clear with you as a clinician who you are and what your job is. And then this is the two words that unite all of the hats that I just described to you, is informed consent. You need to be clear about what your role is, and you need to be able to communicate to the person that you're helping what your role is, and you need to stick to that. And if the person that you're helping is not sure, then you have failed, and that, as Professor Strous has said, that's unethical. It's illegal as well to work without informed consent. So the people that you're helping always need to know why you're there and what you're doing. So now I want to work backwards. As a psychotrauma volunteer, it's very, very precise. When I walk into a scene where somebody experienced trauma, one part of their brain is activated, and my job is to activate a different part of their brain. And then my job is to leave. So I say hi, and I introduce myself, and every single thing that I do is focused on one task, and that is I want the other part of their brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, I want that to start working. And as soon as that happens, I go home, and that's it. I'm not their therapist, and I'm not their friend, and I'm not going to give them a cup of tea. I'm going to activate their prefrontal cortex. And that is very precise. As therapists, sometimes our jobs are less precise. And as Rebbeim, our jobs are even less precise than that. But that doesn't mean that we should not fight to figure out what our role is and communicate that in a very clear way so that our clients or our students or anybody who we're helping can literally sign on the document and say, this is what I give you consent to do with me and how I consent to you doing it with me. And we need to be very clear about that, because part of the therapy often is that people will test the boundaries, and people will always try to get you to do something that you're not really there to do. And if you're not clear about what those boundaries are, then the person who you're helping is not going to be clear about what those boundaries are. Then you're not going to be able to help them. I just want to include in 12 seconds that I am not specifically addressing sexual abuse. We all know that sexual abuse is a problem in the world, everywhere. I'm not talking about that particularly. That deserves its own panel. But if you are a professional and you have a specific role and you have informed consent from your client and you protect and you guide, safeguard those boundaries, then it's a lot less likely that something will happen, and it's a lot more likely that you could effectively help somebody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mendel. I appreciated the jokes a lot. Okay. We're now going to our fourth panelist, and the only woman on our panel, so I identify with her. Ricki Jacobson-Davies holds her MSW from Wurzweiler School of Social Work. She is trained as a social worker and a social work supervisor. Ricki has been in private practice for close to 10 years, specializing in relational trauma and gaslighting. Ricki has developed techniques to assist in understanding trauma and abuse. She has lectured and trained numerous therapists and has developed abuse prevention workshops that have been delivered to thousands of participants to date. She has also co-developed and launched Power to Heal, an empowerment self-defense program utilizing self-defense training as a therapeutic intervention for survivors of interpersonal trauma. Recently, Ricki has launched her own therapy and training center, the Center for Relational Resilience, which guides clients and therapists alike to identify, cope with, and help heal the impact of relational trauma. I look forward to hearing what Ricki has to say.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to those who came before me and made a really good pitch for boundaries in therapy and how important it is. Um, do, do we need to do anything about that? Talk about safety. Um, so in thinking about this talk, I really... What's that? Yeah. Okay. So in... Hi, from the beginning. So in thinking about this talk, I really thought about people that have come to me and it hasn't been their first round of therapy, and maybe it was their third or their fourth round of therapy, and many people have had wonderful experiences, but I thought about the people who didn't. The people who actually experienced therapy that didn't feel safe, that didn't feel productive, that didn't feel helpful, that might have felt even hurtful. And I really thought about what were the main things that went wrong in those other therapies. So my very esteemed colleagues have already spoken about boundaries, and I will definitely say that kind of the biggest, messiest things that could go wrong are very often related to boundaries. I'm not going to focus on that because it's been focused on, but I do want to just throw in one kind of tip for anyone in therapy, therapists alike. A therapist should never, ever be doing something that, that you feel like you have to keep a secret. That's just a very simple rule. We teach this to kids, the idea of good secrets or bad secrets. Obviously, therapy is a private domain, but it should always feel like it's something that it's your choice to share and that you're never protecting your therapist. So just kind of a little tip in terms of boundaries and abuse issues that can come up in therapy that was mentioned. I want to throw that out there. The other things that have come up again and again are basics like dignity, respect, people that just simply felt like they weren't spoken to respectfully. It's so basic, and I kind of feel like as therapists, it's so important to remember, before anything else, treat people the way you treat people. Treat your clients the way you treat people. Treat them with respect. Listen. Have a tremendous amount of respect for their dignity, their story. The thing that I want to focus on is the other things that I've heard from people, which there was respect and there was dignity and there was boundaries. And the thing that went wrong was that there wasn't a shared reality between the client and the therapist, where therapists have years of training and years of acclimation to this incredible work that we do, and we have so much that we conceptualize, and these modalities that we're trained in, and ways to look at different stories, and even the whole culture of therapy, like boundaries themselves. We know what we mean, we know what we're going for, and we know what we're talking about, but clients don't. And so many clients come into therapy, and from the basics, I think what clients and therapists all share are three questions, which is, how does this work? How does this work? How does therapy work? What is going on with me? What's my story? What is it that needs addressing? And how are we going to treat it? All therapists and all clients share those three questions. The question is, are you sharing an answer? So on the level of how does this work, and when it comes to boundaries and the rules of therapy, it's so empowering and helpful for clients to have a good understanding of how it works and why it works that way, and for therapists to really invest time into coming up with language and psychoeducation to kind of present these boundaries that we're talking about. People don't necessarily know why they shouldn't go overtime or shouldn't, hang out with us at home, and they have the right to. They're coming from a culture where this is just very different. The fact that we're not sharing our own personal lives, finding a respectful way to explain that to a client, to let them know that the time is about them or whatever it might be, just investing time as a therapist and as a client, using your voice and speaking up and asking, because I think a lot of clients really just don't know. They don't know what's right or wrong, and they can feel kind of awkward or ashamed if they kind of overstep a boundary that they never even realized was a boundary. So how does this work? Do you have a shared answer on how this works and why it works this way? What is going on in terms of the client's story? What I've seen very painful for people is where they felt like the therapist really did not have a sense of what was going on, or they imposed a certain narrative on them, told them their marriage wouldn't work, or their parents were abusive, or that they're abusive, and they couldn't make heads or tails of what it was that was told to them. It made no sense to them at all. The narrative, and people give a tremendous amount of authority to the therapist's voice and the therapist's take on reality. And My message to therapists is be aware of the authority that you have. In the end of the day, we don't know everything. Be aware, be mindful, listen to your clients. And to clients, the message, maintain your own authority. Like Ralph said, Dr. Strous said, listen to your own voice, check in. Is what is being created, is the narrative created, the story of your life, does it make sense to you? Does it resonate with you? And if not, that's okay, just speak up, ask. And the third question that both people share, which is, and how do we get there? Again, therapists could have gone through incredible trainings and brought into a certain approach or modality, and they do great work with it, and they know the power of it. But we need to remember, we've been doing this for years. This could make absolutely no sense to people who are coming in from their own world with their own story, and don't know why. We're telling them to do, whatever it is that it might be. And again, to the client, the message really being like, you get to ask. You can speak up. You can ask, wait, what is this? How does this work? You get to say, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't understand it. It feels foreign to me. So that's really the message today. And I really, therapy could be an amazing thing, but even the most amazing therapy can feel very threatening or foreign to a person if they don't have a way to really understand it. So it's our jobs as therapists to remember that and invite our clients, check in with them, check if things resonate and make sense to them. And again, to those of us partaking in therapy, to really speak up. You have a right. This is your process. It's your time, your energy, your money, your mind, your heart. Speak up, ask, make sure it makes sense to you and feels right to you. Thank you so much.